What do you do when your fortress in the sky is being torn apart? When two of the four engines that hold you aloft are shattered and you are hundreds of miles from safety, deep in the heart of enemy territory. For one B-17 pilot and his crew, on a fateful autumn day, this was not a hypothetical question. It was a brutal, screaming reality. The decision he made in those frozen moments of crisis would defy standard procedure, defy common sense, and place an unimaginable burden on his shoulders. It was a decision that would mean the difference between life and death for the 9 men who flew with him. This is the story of when a B-17 lost 2 engines over Germany, and the pilot's decision that saved 9 men. Our story unfolds during one of the most ferocious and costly chapters of the air war in Europe, the Second Schweinfurt Raid, also known as Black Thursday. October 14, 1943. The target was the ball-bearing factories of Schweinfurt, a critical node in the Nazi war machine. The 8th Air Force launched 291 B-17 flying fortresses on this deep penetration mission, a daring strike far beyond the range of fighter escort. Among them was a B-17F, serial number 42, to 30,713, nicknamed the Duchess. She was part of the 306 Bombardment Group, based at Thule, England. At her controls was a 22-year-old pilot, First Lieutenant John Jack Robinson, co-pilot Second Lieutenant Frank Valish. Alongside them flew the navigator, bombardier, flight engineer, radio operator, and 4 gunners, 9 men whose lives were utterly dependent on the skill and judgment of their young pilot. Robinson was not a veteran of dozens of missions. He was learning the cruel calculus of aerial combat one mission at a time. And Mission 115 to Schweinfurt was about to deliver a harsh lesson. The strategic situation was dire. Allied planners knew destroying Schweinfurt could cripple German tank and aircraft production. But the Luftwaffe knew it too. The route was a gauntlet of flak batteries and fighter bases. The planners hoped the sheer mass of the bomber formation would be its own protection. But on Black Thursday, the Germans were waiting. They knew the fighters, the P-47 Thunderbolts, would have to turn back at the German border, their fuel exhausted. The final 180 miles to target and the long, desperate flight home would be through a sky swarming with enemy interceptors. The Duchess and her group crossed the enemy coast near Bremen. Almost immediately, the first black, malignant puffs of flak began to the sky around them, an ominous welcome. The temperature inside the unpressurized aircraft was 40 degrees below zero, a cold that seeped into the bones. Then came the fighters. First, the twin-engine Messerschmitt Bf-110s, roaring in from the front with their heavy 20mm cannons blazing. Then the faster, more agile single-engine Focke-Wulf FW-190s and Messerschmitt Bf-109s, attacking from the sides and from above in deadly, slashing passes. The air filled with the crump of flak, the rattle of .50 caliber machine guns from the fortresses, and the screaming whine of German engines. Tracers laced the sky in a lethal tapestry. By 14:30 hours, the formation was approaching the initial point for the bomb run over Schweinfurt. The air was thicker now, dense with smoke and deadly metal. The bombardier would take control for the run, requiring straight and level flight, a bomber's most vulnerable moment. It was then that disaster struck the Duchess, a shell from an FW-190's cannon, or perhaps a large caliber burst from a Bf-110 Schrage Music upward firing guns. The exact source was lost in the chaos, ripped into number 3 engine on the right wing. Metal shrieked. Oil instantly coated the wing in a black, viscous sheet. The engine seized, its propeller windmilling uselessly. The B-17 yawed violently to the right. Lieutenant Robinson and co-pilot Valish fought the controls, using brute strength and full rudder trim to correct the swing. The flight engineer feathered the prop to reduce drag. They were wounded, but still flying. They dropped their bombs with the group and turned for home, but the German fighters were not finished. They preyed on stragglers, and AB-17 losing speed with a feathered engine was a prime target. A second attack came minutes later. This time, cannon fire ravaged the number 4 engine, the other engine on the right wing. There was a violent explosion. Chunks of cowling tore away. Flames, fierce and orange, began to lick back on the nacelle, threatening the wing's fuel tanks. The crisis was now absolute. At an altitude of 24,000 feet, over hostile territory, the Duchess had lost both engines on her right wing. The asymmetric drag was catastrophic. The bomber immediately went into a steep, uncontrollable turn to the right, beginning a spiral towards the Earth. The two remaining engines on the left wing were screaming at maximum power, but they only worsened the turn, acting like a pivot. The centrifugal force pinned the crew to the walls of the fuselage. The altimeter began to unwind. 23,000 feet. 22,500. The ground, the fields and forests of Nazi Germany, spun dizzyingly in the windows. For the 10 men inside, this was the moment fear turned to a cold, certain dread. They were going down. In the cockpit, alarms were auditory and visceral. The roar of the two good engines, the shriek of the wind through torn metal, the acrid smell of smoke and burned oil. The controls fought back like a living thing. Jack Robinson and Frank Valish had their feet hard on the left rudder pedals, their muscles burning, pulling back on the control columns with all their might. It was not enough. The ship was dying. Standard procedure in such a situation was clear. Prepare to abandon aircraft. The pilot would give the order. The crew would clip on their parachutes, open the hatches, and jump into the cold German sky, hoping to survive the descent and face capture as prisoners of war. For many crews, it was the only logical choice. The engineering was clear. A B-17 could not fly on two engines on the same side. It was aerodynamically impossible. The physics were undeniable. The flight engineer's voice crackled over the interphone, reporting the fire in number 4 was spreading. The right wing's integrity was in question. One of the waist gunners reported seeing fighters circling below, like sharks waiting for the kill. The navigator, trying to calculate a path, knew they were over 250 miles from the nearest friendly territory. They were alone, crippled, and descending into a hunter's sky. Robinson faced an impossible calculus. If he gave the bailout order, he was condemning his crew to the uncertainty of capture, or worse, to being shot in their chutes by vengeful fighter pilots, a war crime that was tragically common. If he tried to keep the plane flying, he was fighting against immutable laws of physics. The aircraft could break up at any moment, or the fire could reach a fuel tank and turn them into a falling pyre. The weight of 9 lives pressed down on him. He had seconds to decide. In the left seat, with the world spinning madly outside, Jack Robinson made his choice. He keyed the interphone. His voice, strained but clear, cut through the chaos. We're not abandoning ship. Everyone, prepare for a rough ride. We're going to try to fly her. What happened next was a testament to human will against mechanical reality. Robinson's decision was only the beginning. The how was even more extraordinary. He called for extreme, unorthodox measures. First, he ordered the entire crew, except the 2 pilots and the top turret gunner, to move to the rear of the aircraft. This was critical. By shifting their weight as far back into the left as possible, into the radio room, the ball turret, the waist section, they acted as human ballast. They were trying to counteract the asymmetrical drag of the dead right wing by changing the aircraft's center of gravity. Next, he ordered the flight engineer to go back and manually lower the landing gear. At cruise altitude, this was unheard of. The gear would create massive drag, further slowing them. But Robinson wasn't thinking about speed. He was thinking about control. The dangling wheels, especially on the left side, acted like a drogue chute, a steadying anchor that helped counteract the relentless yaw to the right. It was a desperate, brilliant gamble. Then Robinson and Valish executed a maneuver that seemed to defy every pilot's instinct. They reduced power on the 2 good engines on the left wing. This was counterintuitive. Power was what kept them in the air, but full power was also what was pulling them into the fatal spiral. By reducing throttle, they lessened the pivot force. Combined with the human ballast and the drag of the landing gear, the violent spin began to slow. The altimeter was still falling, but the spin became a steep, controllable descent. They were no longer a spinning leaf. They were a brick, but a stable brick, flying in a wide, right-hand spiral. For the next hour, the Duchess fell out of the sky in this controlled, spiraling descent. German fighters, seeing the lowered gear, the trailing smoke, and the bizarre flight path, likely assumed the bomber was done for and broke off to find other prey. The crew remained at their improvised stations, the gunners watching the skies. The others braced against the fuselage, praying the wings would stay on. Robinson and Valish, sweat freezing on their foreheads, made constant minute adjustments, their bodies fused with the aircraft. They were not so much flying as they were persuading the laws of physics to grant them a temporary reprieve. Image 21. Heroic wide shot of B-17 breaking clouds over coast miraculously. The fire in the number 4 engine, starved of fuel or oxygen, burned itself out. The wing held. After what felt like an eternity, they broke through the clouds at barely 2,000 feet. They were over the coastal region of the Netherlands. The North Sea and Salvation was just ahead. With their last reserves of fuel, Robinson pointed the battered nose of the Duchess out over the water. They had lost nearly 22,000 feet of altitude to achieve stability, but they were alive and free of fighters. A Royal Air Force Spitfire, on coastal patrol, spotted them. Seeing the impossible sight of a B-17 flying with 2 dead engines on one side, landing gear down and trailing smoke, the Spitfire pilot escorted them across the channel. With no hydraulics and minimal control, Robinson performed a wheels-up belly landing on the first friendly field he could find in England. The fortress slid for 1,000 feet, metal screaming against the earth, before coming to a stop in a cloud of dust and grass. Then, one by one, the 10 crewmen of the Duchess emerged from the hatches unscathed. They stood on the wing, looking back at the crumpled, smoking ruin of their aircraft, a machine that by all rights should have been their coffin over Germany. They had flown 250 miles in a crippled plane through some of the most heavily defended skies in the world and lived. For his exceptional airmanship, unwavering command, and sheer determination that saved the lives of his entire crew, First Lieutenant John Jack Robinson was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the nation's second highest award for valor. His story became legend within the 8th Air Force, a beacon of hope in the dark days of 1943. It proved that even when technology failed, human courage and ingenuity could snatch victory from the jaws of certain defeat. The Duchess never flew again, but her crew completed their tours. They had already faced and conquered their darkest hour. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. A story of a split-second decision, of 10 men defying fate, and of a machine that refused to die. Subscribe to World War II Records as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.